So we'll be going till 2 p.m. I'll try to get through an introduction of metadata and Dataverse repositories and leave as much time as possible at the end for questions and discussion. Let's see. So please, if you'd like, use the chat. I don't know if you have access to the chat. But if you don't, I should have asked Dwayne that, because I was hoping everyone could introduce themselves. I'm not sure if you can access chat. So, but please feel free as I'm talking to post your questions in Q&A. You should have that button on the bottom of your screen. And then myself or my other colleagues on the Dataverse team will be happy to answer those questions. So I see Vanessa has your hand up. I'm just gonna allow you to talk. I'm gonna press that button. And you're unmuted. Yes, go ahead.
I don't have a question. I think I might have pressed on something. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Cool. Everyone is raising their hands now. It'd be tough for me as I'm talking to see raised hands. But if you have a question or comment, please leave it in the Q&A panel on Zoom. Also, I'd like to ask everyone when they're chatting, especially at the end of this presentation, where there's time for questions and comments, to follow our contributor covenant code of conduct. A lot of the language in that code of conduct is geared towards folks contributing to Dataverse software, but a lot of it I think is relevant here too. I'll post the well, there's the URL. I'm not sure if you can see chat. Everyone. There you go. I'll be posting URLs in chat, which I think you can see. And that way you can have easy access to the things that I show. So please use welcoming and inclusive language, respect differing viewpoints and experiences, accept criticism constructively, focus on what's best for the community, and show empathy towards other members of the community. If we find that folks are being too disruptive, or we'll have to remove you from the webinar. So these are the 5 things I'll be covering in introduction of this webinar. It will include a bit of information about me that I think will be relevant for this talk. Information about metadata and Dataverse repositories, and that is specifically using the metadata features, entering metadata when you're depositing or helping other people deposit data, searching and browsing, which is very tied to the metadata. So I included that in this talk. A section about what is quote unquote good metadata, and then finally a time for Q&A, for questions and answers, and I'll post a link to a survey that I hope you folks can take. It's like a 3-question survey. It's really short, and hopefully we can use that to improve these webinars, and a list of some upcoming webinars this year and next year. So I'm hoping that by the end of this webinar, you should be able to use Dataverse's metadata features to make data more fair. So maybe you're already doing that. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Dataverse at different levels, but I hope you learn things. I hope this talk verifies some things for you. And by the end of this talk, I should be able to help improve our webinars like this one when we offer it again, based on the feedback you can provide either at the end of this talk or in the post-webinar survey. So when we were thinking about this webinar, I had conversations with some of you. It was largely support staff. Yeah, I asked, I posted and I invited folks to talk with me for a half an hour about metadata in using metadata in Dataverse repositories, their experiences with it. I also had conversations with the curation team at Harvard Dataverse. I reviewed lots of support emails. I also work at Harvard Dataverse, so we get a lot of support emails from folks who need help using the repository or using other repositories or the software in general to publish data. And there's a lot of great conversations and insights in those conversations about metadata. And then a web survey that I did, and a good amount of the content of this webinar was informed by all of the insight that I was able to gather from these web surveys and talks with folks over the last couple of months. So I've been working on Dataverse for about 7 years now. I'm a user experience researcher, so I try to inform the design of Dataverse software and its services using qualitative research like interviews and usability testing and surveys, and quantitative research like analytics. I work on metadata design, and we can learn a lot about how people are able to share data, how data sharing can be improved based on how people use metadata, how it's designed, and how people interpret that design. And I also work on the curation and support team at Harvard Dataverse. So all those things have given me a lot of insight into what works well and what can be improved about how Dataverse helps people publish data. So really quickly, I'd like to go over what kinds of things can be described in Dataverse repositories. I'll say now a lot of this talk will be informed by my experience on Harvard Dataverse, which means that there might be instances where the repository, that the Dataverse installation that you're using doesn't, the workflows might be different. You might have to work with other folks who manage collections and ask them to create collections for you. There might be a review step before you can publish data in certain repositories or in certain collections in those repositories. So I'll be trying to cover everything, but just know that some of these things might be less relevant depending on the Dataverse repository that you're using. But we have Dataverse collections. In the user interface, they're called Dataverses, and they're just groups of data sets. So a collection can contain more collections, and those collections can also contain data sets. And data sets are what contains files, the data files, the code, and the metadata. So these two images are taken from our user guides. So I'll be talking about metadata that you can use to describe collections, data sets, and files. And I'll also mention metadata that Dataverse creates automatically for those things, like persistent IDs, publication dates, version numbers, and some processing that Dataverse tries to do with certain types of files, like tabular data, to extract more metadata automatically. So if you've ever created a collection, you might be familiar with this page, and this is the collection or Dataverse creation page where you can name your Dataverse. You can include an affiliation, like an institutional affiliation. You can add an identifier for the URL to that collection, and that's what you would give folks to so that they can get to the page where your collection is. Categories like who is this, what is this collection about, or who is this collection for, or who's using this collection. Researchers, institutions and organizations, journals. A contact email or emails, and that's how folks can contact the managers of the collection. And a description where you can write what the collection is about, what kind of data is held there. There's a lot of fields that you can use to describe data sets when you're publishing and curating data. This screenshot shows a small part of most of the required fields, metadata fields that most installations require in order to create and publish data. And then you can describe files using file names, which Dataverse will, when you upload the files, Dataverse will save the file name automatically, but you can edit it. You can edit the file path, which is basically which directory or which folder the file is in, and you can add descriptions for each file. You can also add tags to files to help organize them. You can say these files are the data, these files are the code, this file is the documentation, like a README. You can add restrictions to data sets, so that to files rather, so that in itself becomes a piece of metadata that Dataverse and other systems do something with to control who has access to the files and to let folks know, who has access and what do you need to do to get access. And you can add embargo dates and reasons so that at a certain day, restricted files will become unrestricted automatically. So Dataverse collects a lot of information about 4 data sets automatically, like the persistent IDs. In the screenshot, we can see the DOI of a data set, and we can see the publication date. Those are things that Dataverse gives the data set automatically. Version numbers are other things, the sum of file downloads, the number of times that files in the data set have been downloaded. And if you're using a repository that has a make data count enabled, which is an initiative to standardize the ways in which data reuse is quantified, you can also see page views. Dataverse also records differences among versions of data sets as you're updating and publishing new versions of data sets. Dataverse collects a lot of information about files when they're uploaded, the file types, the byte size of the file, the creation date, publication date, checksums, which help with the integrity of the files, especially over time or as they move from one repository to another. File paths, if you upload a file that is in a zip file that has a directory shoulder, that has a structure rather, Dataverse will save that directory structure, and it'll remember what folder each file was in, so that when they're downloaded, they're put in the right folders, and counts of downloads. And then, as like I mentioned, Dataverse creates metadata about ingested tabular files, so CSV files, certain versions of SPSS files, and other kinds of other files with spreadsheets and columns. It'll record counts of variables and observations, variable statistics like minimums and means and maximums, the type of variable that is in the column, and it'll also record a different kind of checksum for tabular data called UNFs. So in the UI, you could see some of that information, and then in other places where Dataverse makes that information available, you can see even more, like the summary statistics. I should also say that a lot of tools use this metadata that Dataverse collects in order to visualize especially quantitative data in different ways, to create bar graphs, or certain counts of the number of times that number of variables, things like that. And you might see that. You see that in Harvard Dataverse, and you might see that in other repositories, Dataverse repositories, depending on how they're configured. So you might already know, but Dataverse groups these metadata fields that depositors and curators are able to enter into groups called metadata blocks. There was a screenshot earlier that showed some of the required fields, and that is in a metadata block called citation metadata. So when you create a collection, or when you're administering a collection, you can decide, aside from the required fields that the installation requires in order to publish data sets, you can decide which fields are required, which fields are optional, which fields even show up. You can hide fields, and use that to kind of streamline the process of describing data. You can also edit and create new. You can edit existing metadata blocks, or create new metadata blocks. But that is something that usually installation administrators are involved in. So for time, I decided not to include that here, but it'll be in another discussions about creating custom metadata blocks or editing existing metadata blocks will be in a webinar next year, and I'll have a list at the end of this talk about upcoming webinars. Other features for that involve metadata are the dataset templates, where you can copy metadata to multiple data sets. You create a template in your collection. So this is something that is defined for each Dataverse collection, and then you can automatically copy that or paste that metadata that's in the template into new data sets that you create to help further streamline the creation of data sets. You can also include instructions. So here we see a bit of text at the top above each field, where you can add custom instructions to your depositors, for example, if you'd like them to do certain things, or include certain information when they're publishing data. So now I'll go over searching and browsing. So specifically searching in collections, and then searching in data sets for files. So you can use the search boxes in order to search in collections for more collections or data sets or files. And there are two places where you can do that. At the top of the page, and this is true for Harvard Dataverse and in most Dataverse installations, there'll be a box to search all Dataverses. So that's searching for all collections, searching for things across all collections in the installation. So when you're using these fields, it's searching for any values, anything that has been entered in any metadata fields that you have, that researchers and curators can enter, and much of the metadata that Dataverse collects automatically, including column names that it might save when it's able to process tabular data like CSV files. So that, again, that box on the top right searches across all collections, and that bar is static, so it exists on every page as you're going, on every page in the repository. And then this search box here searches within the collection that you're looking at. So when you're on the home page, of course, you're searching across all collections because all collections exist under the main collection. But if you're already at a collection, this box will let you search within, will narrow the search to only things that are within that collection. There's also an advanced search, and that is, I think, if I go back, let me go back, please. There's an advanced search link. I should have pointed that out right next to that second search box here. And that takes you to this page where you can search using specific fields, using specific metadata fields. So say you want to search for data sets that are authored by certain people from a certain university. This could help do that. And then on the top, on the left side of each search results page, you have facets, and you can narrow your searches by facets. And then you can also sort the results by alphabetically or based on which data sets were published first or last, or I guess most recently. And so when you're on the on a data set page, you can search for files using this the general search box at the top, and you can search through files that way. You can filter with search facets, and you can filter by type. You can filter by access, so you can tell Dataverse to show you the files that are restricted or are published or are embargoed. You can sort and you have more options here alphabetically, newest to oldest, by size, and by type. And you can view files in folders. So there's a change view button up here, and that lets you change the view from a flat list to one where you can see how the files are organized into folders. And this is using that file path metadata that we saw earlier, that either Dataverse records automatically when you upload zip files or archival files, like other zip file alternatives. I'm blanking on 7-zip, tar, or that you manually enter in the file path field when you're looking at a file. So during my talks and when reviewing the results of the survey that I sent out to collect more information about what would be helpful to cover during this webinar, some folks said it would be helpful to talk about what does good metadata mean, or what is good metadata? How do I know how much effort to direct to describing my data sets? Um, um, so thank you for everyone who did that survey or who spoke with me. I'll be covering that now. So, and I decided to organize it in two different ways, or three different ways, I guess. Metadata that helps others find data sets, metadata that helps others reuse data sets, and examples of some well-described data sets. So metadata fields that discovery systems use when returning search results. It's important to, it's helpful to be aware of that other library catalogs and search engines like Google, anywhere where your metadata might wind up, where metadata about your data might wind up, can become helpful in helping others find that data. And so Harvard data, the Dataverse software, the folks working on Dataverse don't have as much control over how other systems make data discoverable, but we work off a lot on sending them metadata, on knowing what metadata to send, and we try to prioritize that. I'm showing these fields in the citation metadata block because a lot of those fields are fields that get sent to these places using different standards. So title, author, description, those are all very keywords. Those are all very basic fields, and regardless of how other systems prefer to collect metadata about data sets that have been published elsewhere, they're going to be collecting this basic information. Dataverse collects a lot of information, and this is just Harvard Dataverse, and it's 6 metadata blocks. Other Dataverse installations have different metadata blocks, and so figuring out which metadata to send where is a full-time puzzle. But all of these standards that Dataverse uses in order to expose information about what it publishes to other systems, there are some commonalities that you can take advantage of, and you can try to at least prioritize certain metadata fields that'll always appear, or that should always appear in other systems. So like I said, title and description are two very basic metadata fields, and so that are included in all these standards and that appear in other systems where folks are also looking for data. So spending time adding a clear title and a great description, something that is makes it as obvious as possible to folks what your data is about, is really important, and it can be harder than it seems. There was an interesting study, it's 2020, that looked at it was a study that described 2 studies that were done about how people search for data, and it was used to create a set of recommendations for what to include in descriptions. So in the And 4 of those points included: how would you describe the data set in one sentence? What does the data look like? So file formats, data types. These last 2 are more about data that has tabular information, or information that's expressed in a tabular way. But what are the column headers? What are the value types and value ranges for most important headers? Even though Dataverse does try to collect that information automatically, and even though it is common practice to include a code book, right, that might describe all of the, what does each column header mean in your spreadsheet? It can help with discoverability, especially because some of that metadata isn't always sent to other systems. It can help with discoverability to include some of that information and the description of your data set. So the DOI is for this study is at the bottom. And this gets into metadata that leverages how people look for data, which is really important. So I guess another point I'd like to make is that it's something that you have to keep coming back to, especially with fresh eyes over time. You might realize after a year of having published your data set, or having helped someone curate their data, that things could be clarified even more when you go back to the data and you try to make sense of it yourself. So metadata that helps other folks reuse data sets include terms of use and access metadata, including a license is very important. And within the last 2 years, I think the Dataverse software started trying to acquire that more programmatically, to encourage folks to include either licenses, and make it easier to include licenses on your data, or to describe in some way how your data can be used and accessed, especially if it's restricted. Links to other resources can be very important. It can be really helpful to know how the data was used and originally by the person who published the data, of course. We're also in the research data management world is very interested in using this metadata to figure out how often data sets are used, how often they're cited, to measure the influence of data and try to use that to help folks get credit for their data. So including this information and returning to your data set to update it is also really important. And then README files can also be very important to include with your as a file in your data sets. So I thought I would look at particular elements of well-described data sets. And this one's from the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI. And they're a group that publishes data in the Harvard Dataverse repository. And so I just wanted to point out their title and description. Description is short, but it is to the point. And when one sentence describes what the data is, it has some information about different parts of the data and why it was created. The Murray Research Archive is also a collection that is published in Harvard Dataverse, and their title is also great, and so is the description. It shows the purpose of the study, some key information about what was studied and why. And then in Dataverse Norway, I wanted to point out this data set because it it uses some other metadata fields that are becoming more and more important. So including ORCID IDs with the authors is one example of a metadata field that should be filled out and with some sort of persistent ID for the authors. And ORCID is a very popular solution, and one that Dataverse is more and more taking advantage of and hoping to leverage. This data set also has a lot of keywords, and it has related publication. So I'm going to minimize this so that I can see any of the questions that have been written. But I also want to point out the webinar survey. It's just 3 questions. It'll help a lot as we look to create more webinars in the future. And then on the right are some of the upcoming webinars. Next month we have intermediate curation on the Dataverse platform. And then next year we have introduction to Dataverse APIs and a follow-up to this webinar about metadata and Dataverse repositories for installation administrators, where we'll be talking more about the things that right now installation administrators can do, like create new fields or edit existing fields, metadata fields. I'll stop sharing my screen and see if I can get the Q&A. So Tilo Mathis, I hope I pronounced your name right. You asked what usage stats apart from views are reported in the metadata when enabled, and how often are these updated? So when make data count is enabled, what else is recorded? Some guess about the location of the download is recorded. File downloads are recorded. So file downloads, page views, the location, and I think it gets as granular as country. I think that is it. How often are they updated? I think it depends on the implementation. But Harvard Dataverse hasn't enabled this. So I'm hesitant to say how often we would update it, but I would hope at least daily. I hope that answers your question. I guess if folks want to ask more questions, maybe in using your voice, I can you can raise your hand and I'll try to pay attention to raised hands, and then I can unmute you if you'd like to ask more questions, or if you have a comment or need any clarification about anything I brought up. Wow, I left out a lot during this talk because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get through all of it in an hour and leave room for questions. So I know I didn't cover everything. But I don't see any questions. Any more questions? Okay, Juan has his hand raised, so. Oh, great.
Hi,
One.
Julian. How are you doing? I just want to know that the chat is off, and I think I see one question just pop out. So I'm not sure, like you're getting feedback from everyone. Just want you to be aware.
Oh, the chat is off.
Yeah, the chat has been off.
Yeah. I guess if folks can also you could use the Q&A to leave comments that are not questions.
Yeah.
Feel free to
Also, I
do
think
that.
if you copy and paste the URL for the survey, maybe people can look at it on the chat. I think that would be really useful for people.
Copy and paste what URL?
The URL for the survey for the
Ah,
there you are.
awesome. All right, everyone can see that. That's the survey. I'll also try to post the URL to that article that I mentioned that did a study on how people look for data to try to inform what to include in descriptions. And that DOI is the link to that really interesting article. I see another question. So would you please share a bit more about finding and assigning topics and subject headings to datasets? Sure. So most Dataverse installations, including Harvard Dataverse, have a field. I guess I can I'll share my screen again. But this does mean that I won't be able to see the other questions. When you're looking for data, in collections, the subjects and the keyword fields that are in the citation metadata block are included in those searches automatically. So if you typed in astronomy, you would get data sets that have the subject astronomy. But you can also use advanced search to search specifically for data sets that have been assigned the subject astronomy, for example, or any of the subjects that you see on my screen here. Agricultural sciences, arts and humanities, astronomy, and astrophysics. People also put subject headings like Library of Congress subject headings as keywords or as topic classifications. Those are two other metadata fields in the citation metadata block. And you could use the advanced search page to search for data sets that have been given those different subject headings in those fields as well. Because this subject field is, has just 13 or 14 broad disciplines, and then another option called other. I hope that helped, but if you would like, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Or you can leave another question if I haven't answered that one very well. All right, well, perfect. I hope this was helpful. Please feel free to visit that link for that survey. Again, it's just 3 questions. And it'd be really helpful for me to figure out, how well this survey helped. I mean, how well this webinar helped, and what other topics we might cover in the future. And then a recording of this this webinar will be on Dataverse TV. So I'll try to throw that link in the chat as well. Sometime next week. And then I'll also share these slides. Maybe in the description of the video on that Dataverse TV page, and also in the Dataverse community forum. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Yeah, and enjoy the rest of your day.